Good morning. First, I want to remind all of my subscribers that tonight the weekly meeting will be held at Sammy's Italian Pizza Kitchen in Annapolis, Maryland, the Eastport Shopping Center at 8 p.m. There will be no, sorry, there will be no webinar tonight, but I will post the video from tonight's session tomorrow. Now let me just get my image correct here. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, so this morning I'm going to be reading from the Red Book, Liber Novus, Reader's Edition by C.G. Jung. And I'm going to begin reading on page 225. We're in the middle of a segment of the Red Book called The Castle in the Forest. And just a reminder, this book includes active imaginations of Dr. Jung, which he conducted during the 19 teens. It was an experiment on himself. And so to the extent there's a story here, this is a story that is an imaginal story within Dr. Jung's psyche. If you're not familiar with active imagination, I urge you to take a look at some of the descriptions of it that are online. There are many. So this is a segment which I'm calling Know Your Limits, and it's about 8 pages, and it begins on page 225 of the Reader's Edition of the Red Book by C.G. Jung. If no outer adventure happens to you, if no outer adventure happens to you, then no inner adventure happens to you either. The part that you take over from the devil, joy that is, leads you into adventure. In this way, you will find your lower as well as your upper limits. It is necessary for you to know your limits. If you do not know them, you run into the artificial barriers of your imagination and the expectations of your fellow men. But your life will not take kindly to being hemmed in by artificial barriers. Life wants to jump over such barriers, and you will fall out with yourself. These barriers are not real limits. These barriers are not real limits, but arbitrary limitations that do unnecessary violence to you. Therefore, try to find your real limits. One never knows them in advance, but one sees and understands them only when one reaches them. And this happens to you only if you have balance. Within balance, you transgress your limits without noticing what has happened to you. You achieve balance, however, only if you nurture your opposite. But that is hateful to you in your innermost core because it is not heroic. My spirit reflected on everything rare and uncommon. It pried its way into unfound possibilities, toward paths that led into the hidden, toward lights that shine in the night. And as my spirit did this, everything ordinary in me suffered harm without my noticing it, and it began to hanker after life, since I did not live it. Hence this adventure. I was smitten by the romantic. The romantic is a step backward. To reach the way, you must sometimes also take a few steps backward. In the adventure, I experienced what I had witnessed in the Mysterium. What I saw there as Salome and Elijah became in life the old scholar and his pale, locked-up daughter. What I live is a distorted likeness of the mysterium. Following the romantic way, I reach the awkwardness and ordinariness of life, where I run out of thoughts and almost forget myself. What I formerly loved, I must now experience as feeble and wasted, and what I formerly derided, I had to envy as towering and helplessly crave. I accepted the absurdity of this adventure. No sooner had this happened than I also saw how the maiden transformed herself and signified an autonomous meaning. One inquires into the desire of the ridiculous, and that is enough for it to change. What about masculinity? Do you know how much femininity man lacks for completeness? Do you know how much masculinity woman lacks for completeness? You seek the feminine in women and the masculine in men. This and thus there are always only men and women. But where are people? You, man, should not seek the feminine in women, but seek and recognize it in yourself as you possess it from the beginning. It pleases you, however, to play at manliness because it travels on a well worn track. You, woman, should not seek the masculine in men, but assume the masculine in yourself, since you possess it from the beginning. But it amuses you and is easy to play at femininity. Consequently, man despises you because you consequently man despises you because he despises his femininity. But humankind is masculine and feminine, not just man or woman. You can hardly say of your you can hardly say of your soul what sex it is. But if you pay close attention, you will see that the most masculine man has a feminine soul, and the most feminine woman has a masculine soul. The more manly you are, the more remote from you is what woman really is, since the feminine in yourself is alien and contemptuous. If you take a piece of joy from the devil and set off on adventures with it, you accept your pleasure, but pleasure immediately attracts everything you desire, and then you must decide whether your pleasure spoils or enhances you. If you if you are of the devil, you will grope in blind desire after the manifold, and it will lead you astray. But if you remain with yourself as a man who is himself and not of the devil, then you will remember your humanity. You will not behave toward women per se as a man, but as a human being. That is to say, as if you were of the same sex as her. You will recall your femininity. You will recall your femininity. It may seem to you then as if you were unmanly, stupid, and feminine, so to speak, but you must accept the ridiculous, otherwise, you will suffer distress. And there will come a time when you are least observant, when it will suddenly round on you and make you ridiculous. It is bitter. Just a moment. We'll mark that page for tonight. It is bitter for the most masculine man to accept his femininity. It is bitter for the most masculine man to accept his femininity, since it appears ridiculous to him, powerless and tawdry. Yes, it seems as if you have lost all virtue, as if you have fallen into debasement. It seems the same way to the woman who accepts her masculinity. Yes, it seems to you like enslavement. You are a slave of what you need in your soul. The most masculine man needs woman. The most masculine man needs women, and he is consequently their slave. Become a woman yourself, and you will be saved from slavery to women. You are abandoned without mercy to woman, so long as you cannot fend off mockery with all your masculinity. It is good for you once to put on women's clothes. People will laugh at you, but through becoming a woman, you attain freedom from women and their tyranny. The acceptance of femininity leads to completion. The same is valid for the woman who accepts her masculinity. Hello, Brandy. Thank you for joining me today. So for those of you who have just joined, I'm reading from The Castle in the Forest from the Red Book by C.G. Jung. I'm on page 228 of the Reader's Edition. The feminine in men is bound up with evil. I find it on the way of desire. The masculine in the woman is bound up with evil. Therefore, people hate to accept their own other. But if you accept it, that which is connected with the perfection of men comes to pass, namely, that when you become the one who is mocked, the white bird of the soul comes flying. It was far away, but your humiliation attracted it. The mystery draws near to you, and things happen around you like miracles. A gold luster shines since the sun has risen a gold luster shines since the sun has risen from its grave. As a man, you have no soul, since it is in the woman. As a woman, you have no soul, since it is in the man. But if you become a human being, then your soul comes to you. If you remain within arbitrary and artificially created boundaries, you will walk as between two high walls. You do not see the immensity of the world. But if you break down the walls that confine your view, and if the immensity and its endless uncertainty inspire you with fear, then the ancient sleeper awakens in you, whose messenger is the white bird. Then you need the message of the old tamer of chaos. There in the world of chaos dwells eternal wonder. Your world begins to become wonderful. Man belongs not only to an ordered world, he also belongs in the wonder world of his soul. Consequently, you must make your ordered world horrible so that you are put off by being too much outside yourself. I'll just mark that. Okay. That will be for later. Okay, I'm on page 229 of the Red Book by C.G. Jung, Reader's Edition. Your soul is in great need because drought weighs on its world. If you look outside yourselves, you see the far-off forest and mountains, and above them your vision climbs to the realms of the stars. And if you look into yourselves, you will see, on the other hand, the nearby as far off and infinite, since the world of the inner is as infinite as the world of the outer. Just as you become a part of the manifold essence of the world through your bodies, so you... Sorry. I apologize for that. I'm suffering from a slight cold and I wanted to spare you. Anyway, let me go back to the beginning of that paragraph. Your soul is in great need because drought weighs on its world. If you look outside yourselves, you see the far-off forest and mountains, and above them your vision climbs to the realm of the stars. And if you look into yourselves, you will see, on the other hand, the nearby as far off and infinite, since the world of the inner is as infinite as the world of the outer. Just as you become a part of the manifold essence of the world through your bodies, so you become a part of the manifold essence of the inner world through your soul. This inner world is truly infinite, in no way poorer than the outer one. Man lives in two worlds. A fool lives here and there. A fool lives here or there, but never here and there. Flea asks, was Jung known to be a part of any not-so-secret societies or anything of that sort? No. In fact, he considered secret societies as crutches for the lame. Okay, that's how he put it in Memory Stream's Reflections. So he was not a secret society guy. I mean, what we're talking about in this book and what he talks about throughout his career is how our psyche actually works. And our psyche actually works through images that it gives us in dreams and visions and, visions of a goal and that sort of thing. And what's happened in psychology, it seems to me, is that we've used a lot of logos style statistical methods to say this or that about what people should or should not do. And, this is the error of Dr. Jordan Peterson, for example, who wants to give you rules to live by. But the problem is you can't live by rules. And and so you have to know what you can transgress. Now, I'm sorry that I've interrupted the reading, but let me go on. So I'm not necessarily going to respond to questions on the chat until the end. Okay, reading on. I'm on page 229, and I'm reading from page 229, the Red Book, Liber Novus, Reader's Edition by C.G. Jung. Perhaps you think that a man who consecrates his life to research leads a spiritual life and that his soul lives in larger measure than anyone else's. But such a life is also external, just as external as the life of a man who lives for outer things. To be sure, such a scholar does not live for outer things, but for outer thoughts, not for himself, but for his object. If you say of a man that he has totally lost himself to the outer and wasted his years in excess, you must also say the same of this old man. Sorry. He has thrown himself away in all the books and thoughts of others. Consequently, his soul is in great need. It must humiliate itself and run into every stranger's room to beg for the recognition that he fails to give her. And I just want to mark this as well, because this is the fundamental flaw in John Vervaeke's perception of the meaning crisis. He has thrown himself away in the books and thoughts of others. So he's now done 50 videos on the meaning crisis, and he has barely grokked what it's really about, because meaning in the sense that he means doesn't come as a definition. It comes from a feeling. It comes from what is the meaning of your life, and how have you spent your life. And so this following paragraph is really on point to that. Therefore you see those old scholars running after recognition in a ridiculous and undignified manner. They are offended if their name is not mentioned, cast down if another says the same thing in a better way, irreconcilable if someone alters their views in the least. Go to the meetings of scholars, and you will see them, these lamentable old men with their great merits and their starved souls, famished for recognition and their thirst, which can never be slaked. The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom. Therefore, because I rise above gendered masculinity and yet do not exceed the human, the feminine that is contemptible to me transforms itself into a meaningful being. This is the most difficult thing, to be beyond the gendered and yet remain within the human. If you rise above the gendered with the help of a general rule, you become the same as that rule and overreach the human. Therefore, you become dry, hard, and inhuman. You know, I'll just comment that over the Christmas holidays, I was listening to, I think it was episode 49 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And I was listening to it in the car, and my wife made me turn it off. She says, "Why does he have to yell?" And she said, "It's just giving me a headache." And I said, wow, okay, so Dr. Jung predicted this 100 years ago, century ago. Okay, reading on. I'm on page 230 of the Red Book by C.G. Jung, Reader's Edition. You may go past the gendered for human reasons and never for the sake of a general rule that remains the same in the most diverse situations, and therefore never has a perfect validity for each single situation. If you act from your humanity, you act from that particular situation without general principle, with only what corresponds to the situation. Thus you do justice to the situation, perhaps at the expense of a general rule. That should not be too painful for you, because you are not the rule. There is something else that is human, something all too human. Whoever has ended up there will do well to remember the blessing of the general rule. For the general rule also has meaning and has been set up for fun. It comprises much venerable work of the human spirit. Such persons are not capable of a general principle above the gendered, but only their imagination is capable of what they have lost. They have become their own imagination and arbitrariness to their own detriment. They need to remember the gendered so that they wake from their dreams to reality. It is as agonizing as a sleepless night to fulfill the beyond from the here and now, namely the other and the opposing in myself. It sneaks up like a fever, like a poisonous fog, and when your senses are excited and stretched to the utmost, the demonic comes as something so insipid and worn out, so mild and stale that it makes you sick. Here you would gladly stop feeling across your beyond. Startled and disgusted, you long for the return to the supernal beauties of your visible world. You spit out and curse everything that lies beyond your lovely world, since you know that it is the disgust, scum, refuse of the human animal who stuffs himself in dark places, creeps along sidewalks, sniffs out every blessed angle, and from the cradle to the grave enjoys only what has already been on everyone's lips. But here you may stop. Do not place your disgust between your here and now and your beyond. The way The way to your beyond leads through hell, and in fact through your own holy particular hell. And in fact through your own holy particular hell, whose bottom consists of knee-deep rubble. Sorry. Not good. Sorry, I apologize. I will read that again. But here you may stop. Do not place your disgust between your here and now and your beyond. The way to your beyond leads through hell, and in fact through your own holy particular hell, whose bottom consists of knee-deep rubble, whose air is the spent breath of millions, whose fires are dwarf-like passions, and whose devils are chimerical signboards. Everything odious and disgusting is your own particular hell. How can it be otherwise? Every other hell was at least worth seeing or full of fun. But that is never hell. Your hell is made up of all the things that you always ejected from your sanctuary with a curse and a kick of the foot. When you step into your own hell, never think that you come like one suffering in beauty or as a proud pariah, but you come like a stupid and curious fool and gaze in wonder at the scraps that have fallen from your table. That's cheery. One more paragraph, page 232. You really want to rage, but you see at the same time how well rage suits you. Your hellish absurdity stretches for miles. Good for you if you can swear. You will find that profanity is life-saving. Thus, if you go through hell, you should not forget to give due attention to whatever crosses your path. Quietly look into everything that excites your contempt or rage. Sorry, this was a fool's errand to try to read this. Okay, one more time with that last paragraph. Sorry. You really want to rage, but you see at the same time how well rage suits you. Your hellish absurdity stretches for miles. Good for you if you can swear. You will find that profanity is life-saving. Thus, if you go through hell, you should not forget to give due attention to whatever crosses your path. Quietly look into everything that excites your contempt or rage. Thereby you accomplish the miracle that I experienced with the pale maiden. You give soul to the soulless, and thereby it can come to something out of the horrible nothingness. Thus you will redeem your other into life. Your values want to draw you away from what you presently are, to get you ahead of and beyond yourself. Your being, however, pulls you to the bottom like lead. You cannot at the same time live both, since both exclude each other. But on the way you can live both. Therefore, the way redeems you. You cannot at the same time be on the mountain and in the valley, but your way leads you from mountain to valley and from valley to mountain. Much begins amusingly and leads into the dark hell has levels. Okay, you've been seeing a demonstration of this during this reading because I'm going through the hell of trying to read and being embarrassed in front of my subscribers and having to accept my limits. And So it's embarrassing. I mean, it's like being in the valley, but in a sense, it redeems me because it allows me to understand the value of not being ill. Now I'll just read a few of these footnotes. I'm not, let's see. I'm going to go back to all the footnotes that appear in The Castle in the Forest. And this was handwritten, and it was originally entitled The Second Adventure. And the date of this writing was December 28, 1913. And there's a reference here to Dante's Inferno begins with the poet getting lost in a dark wood. There is a slip of paper in Jung's copy at this page. There's a footnote here. It says, to reach the way, one must sometimes also take a few steps backward. And the footnote reads, the draft continues, I returned to my Middle Ages where I was still romantic, and there I experienced the adventure. And then here's another. The more manly you are, the more remote from you is what woman really is, since the feminine in yourself is alien and contemptuous. That's what the text says. The footnote says, in 1921, in Psychological Types, which is volume 6 of the collected works, Jung wrote, a very feminine woman has a masculine soul, and a very masculine man has a feminine soul. The contrast is due to the fact that, for example, a man is not in all things wholly masculine, but also normally has certain feminine traits. The more masculine his outer attitude is, the more his feminine traits are obliterated. Instead, they appear in the unconscious. And that's Collected Works, paragraph 804. He designated the man's feminine soul as the anima and the woman's masculine soul as the animus, and described how individuals projected their soul images onto members of the opposite sex, paragraph 805 of Collected Works 6. And going on, for Jung, the integration of the anima for the man and the animus for the woman was necessary for the development of the personality. In 1928, he described this process, which required withdrawing the projections from members of the opposite sex, differentiating from them and becoming conscious of them in relation between the I and the unconscious, part 2, chapter 2, Collected Works 7, paragraph 296 and following. See also Ion, Collected Works 9, 2, paragraph 20 and following. And then in footnote 28, he says, instead of this phrase, the corrected draft has, but if he accepts the feminine in himself, he frees himself from slavery to woman. Albert Dieterich noted, often enough popular belief deems the soul a bird from the start. Okay. And then another footnote here. The draft and corrected draft have, quote, inasmuch as I was this old man, buried in books and barren science, just and appraising, resting grains of sand from the infinite desert. My self, so-called soul, namely my inner self, suffered greatly. There's a reference here to All Too Human. Human, All Too Human was the title of a work of Nietzsche's, published in 3 installments from 1878. He described psychological observation as the reflection on the human, all too human. The text reads on page 231, when you step into your own hell, never think that you come like one suffering in beauty or as a proud pariah, but you come like a stupid and curious fool and gaze in wonder at the scraps that have fallen from your table. The footnote reads, in October 1916, in his talk before the Psychological Club on individuation and collectivity, Jung noted that through individuation, the individual must now consolidate himself by cutting himself off from the divine and become wholly himself. Thereby, at the same time, he also separates himself from society. Outwardly he plunges into solitude, but inwardly into hell, distance from God. That's covered in Collected Works 18, paragraph 1103. And I just observed that many of Dr. Jung's very important messages have been buried by whoever, the collectors of the collected works and Jungian analysts in general for many years. And some of these were not published, but some of them, a lot of the important ones, do appear in volume 18 of the collected works. So this statement is pretty deep in Jungian psychology, and you have to be pretty committed to get to volume 18 in order to read this. So let me read it once again. In October 1916, in his talk before the Psychological Club on individuation and collectivity, Jung noted that through individuation, the individual must now consolidate himself by cutting himself off from the divine and become wholly himself. Thereby, and at the same time, he also separates himself from society. Outwardly plunges into solitude, but inwardly into hell, distance from God. And again, Collected Works 18, paragraph 1103. And there's this particular segment ended with this comment: much begins amusingly and leads into the dark hell, has levels. And the footnote reads, in Dante's Commedia, hell has 9 levels. Okay, so that's all the footnotes from the castle in the forest. And that's the completion of today's reading. I'm honored that many of you have stuck with me even through my suffering here. Flea says, I appreciate your response and largely agree modern psychology is repressive and not very productive or good for the heart. I upvote the idea of not answering the questions before the end of the video. When I was listening to you in my car, I wanted to hear only book reading part. I apologize when I do diverge from that. And yeah, I've been trying to turn off the mic, but sometimes I don't get to it. That's part of my hell, and I guess yours as well. And Flea says, I'm doing it when using Discord or something else. Should I stop? And she says, what is the purpose of life? Well, the the question of that is that what is the purpose of your life? And you need to answer that for yourself. Um, and that's the issue of the meaning crisis, right? And so what Dr. Jung is saying here is you have to get out into life. You have to make some mistakes. You have to um, do things and find out what you were individually meant to be and what you were individually meant to accomplish in your life. And only by doing that are you going to find out what the meaning of your life is. And maybe at the end, someone will be able to sum it up. Uh, but um, you know, if you're asking a metaphysical question of the purpose of life, you know, I couldn't say you need to go to a theologian for that because it's metaphysical. Uh, and Dixon says, valiant efforts give. You should be on bed with a hot drink. Yep. Can you handle? And Fire says, can you handle the answer? What are you going to do with the answer? Uh, and yeah, you have to go into the forest. NC says you have to go into the forest, live there, and stop following society. And so, one of the critical things here, and I know that I have many young subscribers, and so if you're 19, 20, or 21, let's say, and you're worried about the meaning of life, the answer to that is to get one. And then you will find out what the meaning of your life is. And this is what NC says by go into the forest and live there. Um, and, you know, rules are fine and they work perfectly for certain purposes in life. For example, when I was serving actively in the U.S. Marine Corps, there are lots of rules in the Marines, and they're very strict and rigid rules. And everybody knows where he stands, and everybody knows what the pecking order is. And there's no doubt about that. But we have to remember that the Marine Corps is a weapon. It's a weapon of the President of the United States. And so, as such, it has to have very rigid rules. And so, when you're becoming a man or a woman in the Marine Corps, you're finding out about yourself and your ego, perhaps. You have to understand that you're becoming part of a very large weapon. But that doesn't mean that that's everything in life. And the issue about individuation that has been explicated a little better lately is that first you need to have a strong ego and you have to have a strong commitment to society. And that is certainly shaped when you're trained in the Marines or in many other organizations. But as Dr. Jung said about secret societies, they're crutches for the lame. And so the Marine Corps is great for learning about yourself and learning your ego. But then when you're finished with the Marine Corps, which frequently happens when you're about 40 or 45, in my case, my active service in the Marine Corps ended when I was 43, when I broke my leg in uniform. When that ends, then you have to decide what you're going to be when you grow up. And so that's what individuation is about. And that's where the Job archetype comes in, to help you start to see what your other alternatives are. And, you know, with an ego, you certainly think, oh my God, I'm going to be this, and this is what I'm going to be for the rest of my life. You think that when you're 20. I thought that, joining the Marine Corps and serving the Marine Corps. But then you find out that maybe there are other things in life. And so when I broke my leg and therefore ended my Marine Corps career, I had to decide what I was going to be when I grew up. And so here I am. Is this a meaningful thing? I think it is, because there are a lot of people who come to me who are confused by the education that they've had, and by the experiences they've had. And I certainly have found Dr. Jung very helpful for me for the last now 33 years in helping me understand who I am and where I am in my life. And the reason I started this channel was mainly to help others see how helpful and useful Dr. Jung's teachings are. They're not rigid teachings. It's not like learning the ABCs or like learning how to count to 100. It's intended to stimulate your experience. And so you have to go through some things in order to have a whole and fulsome life. Let's see, what other questions we have. And NC says, because God never came to say what it is that is the purpose of life. Yep, he didn't. And we're just cutting trees and building houses and going on and on. And Dr. Jung made the point that, unfortunately, organized religion is still looking back toward the Pentecostal events. And what we have to do is look at where the Spirit is leading us. And so if we don't try to understand that, then we're really nowhere. And so we're still stuck in a frame of mind that first came up 2,000 years ago, and that's largely run out, as the 20th century proves, with 175 million people killed by violence. Now perhaps we can start waking up. It's a new stage of consciousness, and it requires new thinking. I don't claim to have the answers, but I know that that's the issue. Happy New Year, Penelope. Nice to see you. Thanks for your wishes. So anyway, yeah, it's a roll to get there. No kidding. So we have to live and learn. And so, Fire, thank you for your appreciation. Flea, you have certainly stimulated my experiences this morning. Thanks so much. Have you ever heard of Alan Watts? He knew Jung personally and was a very big proponent of Eastern culture. Well, of course, I've heard of Alan Watts, and as some of my newer subscribers might not know, I live with a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. In effect, she's Caucasian and she's my wife, but she also did a 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the equivalent of divinity school in Buddhism. And so, and today, if I weren't sick, I would be going to a weekly meditation class that I attend every Monday at noon with the Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And I would be doing that today if I weren't ill. I think I'm going to bail today because I don't want to make my friends sick. But we can do well and learn from all ways of approaching our psyche. And the point is that the Buddha and Christ started at two ends of a spectrum, and the spectrum is the ego and the self. And so Christ represents the ego and the suffering of the ego, and the self represents um, what really drives us, the wholeness of life and wholeness of the universe. And uh, as Michio Kaku, the famous television physicist, has said, um, every atom in the universe is attached to every other atom in the universe. And so we need to start recognizing that. But it's a balance between the ego and that. And so we can't have for example, let's take climate change and the forest fires in Australia as an example. We can't just, from an egoistic point of view, say, okay, well, we're just going to move everybody out of Australia. We'll put all the fires out, or we'll just let it burn itself out, and then we'll come back, or some other panacea answer. There's no panacea answer to these big questions. But at the same time, um, we can't just sit on a cushion as Tibetan Buddhist lamas do and expect the fires to go out. They're not going to go out unless we do something, unless we get off the cushion and do something that is egoistic. So we have to balance these two. So, meditation is not the only answer. You have to, meditation is a good way to listen to yourself and learn from the 3.5 billion-year-old person within you about things that are significant. And so that person, quote unquote, that self within you has kept you alive for your whole life. And it's kept all your millions of ancestors alive to the point where they could at least reproduce. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in existence. So it's a pretty wise counselor for you, but it's buried very deep in your psyche. And what we're talking about largely when we're talking about dreams and visions is we're talking about how to listen to that part of yourself. And, you can get a lot of crazy ideas in the ego world. If you turn on the television, you see it everywhere. But you can also get lots of wisdom from your psyche, which is, as old as life itself. And you have ancestors that go back to single-celled organisms, even before sex was invented. So there's a lot of wisdom that's in all of us innately. And Dr. Jung, it was about that. And unfortunately, the Logos is all about ego. And it says things like, you can write a book called The 12 Rules of Life, and then everything's done. We got it perfect. Well, it doesn't work that way, okay? Because every one of those rules that Dr. Peterson wrote can at some point be broken and should be broken. And it depends on the specific situation. And I like Kitty Flanagan's retort to the 12 Rules of Life, which was something like the 433 Rules of Life, which you can find here on YouTube. And William the Bastard says, what if you have an abnormally malevolent shadow? What can you do about that? Well, I don't know. You have to meditate on that. The reality is we all have abnormally malevolent shadows, and we have abnormally malevolent shadows, not only in ourselves, but in our societies and groups at large. And so, and the psyche communicates with you bombastically, is what is how Dr. Jung puts it. I mean, that's why dreams can be so intense and visions can be so intense, because our psyche is bombastic and it will communicate with you bombastically. So I would be very surprised that you have an abnormally malevolent shadow. We all have abnormally, we all have normally malevolent shadows. And the question is, do we have control of it or not? Can we balance it? And, we see that every day in how the consequences of our malevolent shadow in our society, the things that we allow to happen in our name, are oftentimes quite malevolent, um, and they can trigger other people's shadows as well. So when the president of the United States decides to kill one man, all of a sudden we have hundreds of thousands of other human beings that are responding to that with their shadow. And so we have to decide what's appropriate for our humanity and what isn't, and that's good for us. And Flea, by the way, I really urge you to, it's Kitty or Katie Flanagan, I can't remember which, but I think her book is called 433 Rules of Life. And it's a 5-minute video, but it's truly hilarious. And she's responding to Jordan Peterson. And so, when you have rules, those rules are the ego trying to solve all the problems of the world, but you need to have balance. That's clear. And so I've digressed a little bit, since we have a good following here today, but I really need to stop subjecting you all to my cold. NC says, reaching higher states of mind, leaving ego, is a take DMT and be high on shamanic mushrooms. No, I do not recommend taking any drugs. These are, you can do all this just with your own capabilities without any enhancements. And, the problem with taking drugs is that if it isn't properly managed, can cause real problems, as Jordan Peterson has demonstrated, because so you can start to understand what yourself is saying, and you can communicate with yourself through dreams and visions without an active imagination, without taking drugs. And drugs have led to, I think it's 72,000 deaths in the United States in 2018. I don't think I've seen a number for 2019 yet, but I know that 3 young people in my immediate knowledge, people that are within my family or my purview of friends and family, have died from drug overdoses in the last 2 years. And so that's a huge tragedy of our society that we need to get control of. Now, I do know that Johns Hopkins University and others are experimenting with certain hallucinogenic drugs as ways of giving people a breakthrough. But please note that that's done under the supervision of a professional, and even a professional under the supervision of a professional doesn't always win, as Jordan Peterson has demonstrated personally, because he apparently was taking a drug. I think it's called psilocybin or something like that, or some other drug. I don't actually know for sure because I haven't followed it precisely, but I know he was, he's obviously a very competent professional psychologist in his own right, and he was working with a professional regarding his own depression, and he ended up it ended up getting out of control, and he had to go into detox himself. And so here's a man who's respected around the world for his psychological wisdom, and it got out of control in his own personal case. And so I really highly recommend against getting involved in drugs unless you really know what you're doing. And by that, I mean you're professionally trained, or you're under the supervision of someone who's professionally trained. As I say, I've lost 3 people in my close friends and family who have died in the last 2 years because of drug overdoses. So I'm very conscious of it. William the Bastard says, can mindfulness help transcend the ego? Certainly it can. And one of the reasons that I go to my meditation group is not because I'm a Buddhist per se, or because I'm a believer in Tibetan Buddhism as the solution for me. It's rather because I think that meditation and mindfulness are good ways to listen to yourself and hear yourself. And please go and check out the book. Thank you so much. I recommend watching a 3-minute video on YouTube titled Alan Watts Dolphins. It is nothing groundbreaking, but it certainly makes me smile. Okay, well, thank you. And yes, Alan Watts was a very good thinker in the late 20th century. And there are a lot of videos of Alan Watts on television or on YouTube, and I urge you to take a look at them. He was a very good thinker, along with many others. And so I need to terminate at this point, but thank you for being here today, and I hope to see you again soon.